I wanted to figure out how to replace myself every day.
You're not worrying about being automated out of a job, but automating yourself into a better job.
AI is really good at the part of the job that I spent all my time trying to drag my team into doing.
AI isn't just changing how we write software. It's changing how we work, how we think, and even who owns the knowledge we hold in our heads. For decades, employees could take the experience they gained from one company to the next, but in a world of AI agents, persistent memory, and automation, what happens when your expertise gets captured by the very systems and workflows that you're building? My guest today is Joe Sullivan. He's the former security officer at Facebook, Uber, Cloudflare, a former federal prosecutor, and one of the industry's most thoughtful voices on where AI is taking cybersecurity. He also runs the nonprofit Ukraine Friends, where he brings technology to enable remote learning for children affected by the war in Ukraine. Now, in this episode, Joe and I dig into the implications of those organizations that are codifying employee expertise. And we get into how teams need to rethink vulnerability management, the long tail effects of open source AI, and we discuss why the next generation of security leaders needs to stop optimizing for prevention and instead needs to start optimizing for adaptation. This conversation goes well beyond the AI hype, and it gets into the long-term implications for security, business, and the way all of us will be working. So let's get into it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Threats, Pitfalls, and Risk Myths, the TPRM podcast. Today, I'm joined by Joe Sullivan, who has a long and storied history in the Valley. You were CSO over at Facebook, Cloudflare, Uber, just some small companies.
Yep.
Federal prosecutor.
I basically right after I got out of school, I moved to San Francisco and got out here a little bit before the dot-com boom. And I made the mistake of working for the federal government through that whole boom. But it wasn't a mistake. It was actually an amazing time and an amazing experience. But I get to do high-tech cyber prosecutions, working with the tech companies in the Valley. So got to think about cybersecurity from that prosecutor perspective and learn a lot.
Fun. I think you kind of help shape a lot of the policy and things that are governing what we're doing today. So I don't know that too many people call that one a mistake. It sounds very interesting, and I think you had a lot of influence there.
Well, in some ways it's a lot like today. Yeah, I imagine in our conversation we're going to talk through the challenges that AI is bringing in terms of there's not a lot of structured rules from the past that we can just copy automatically into this time. When the internet was blowing up, when people were first starting to do e-commerce, when fraud was starting to happen, like the internet changed everything in terms of attackers being able to hurt people on the other side of the planet. And as a prosecutor, we just had to figure out really quickly, is there an existing law that would work? Should the existing law be applied in this new context? It was a complicated time, and we're in a similar time right now.
Yeah, and trying to figure out, what are the principles that need to be applied, and because I think the laws themselves, it's kind of hard to map a lot of this stuff one for one when you think of kind of the old versus new, like pre-internet to internet and pre-AI to AI. We have some principles that probably map, but the actual letter of the law is just not ready for that, it seems like.
I think it's been a recurring pattern for the last 25 years that legislation and regulation don't keep up with technology. Mm-hmm. And to a certain extent, we don't want to rush to regulate and legislate. But on the other hand, the absence leads to people getting hurt sometimes, and that's not good.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think we have some interesting things on that topic to talk about later as well. I know this week you wrote something on LinkedIn, which is really interesting. I know got a lot of traction covering like at work now, people, and what you're doing at work is you're kind of codifying all the knowledge in your head and training agents and building, whether it's skills or whatever. It's basically codifying the knowledge you have in your head. And it was a really interesting argument you made that I hadn't thought about, which is kind of the agreement we had between employers and employees that you take skills that you gain while you're employed, and you can take those to the next employer. But in this case, you're kind of codifying those and leaving those behind. And there's just, a lot of implications, whether it's just for employment more generally and privacy and what does this mean for you? Or are you kind of building yourself out of a job? I'd love to, just hear your thoughts on that and kind of we can dive into it from there.
Yeah, this is a topic I've been thinking about for over a year. I remember I started digging on it last summer, probably right about now, last July. I was
Hmm.
spending some time with one of my daughters. She was getting ready to go off to college. I said, which AI does your school give you access to? I pay for a chat GPT for our family. And
Hmm.
actually, one of the annoying things that I don't like that I would request as a product feature for chat GPT and some of the others is that they offer a family plan. Because if you're like me and you have three daughters and a stepson, and you want to give them all access to some
Hmm.
advanced model, you don't want to really put your credit card on four different teenager accounts and let them go to town. And so I wanted a family plan, and there was no family plan. So I had created basically a chat GPT business account and put all the kids under me. So I have like my
Okay.
business account for my security consulting with that email address, and then I have a separate chat GPT business account for the family
For the family.
so I can manage the AI cost at home. And I was talking to my daughter. She was getting ready to go off for freshman year of college, and she said, "Oh, my university provides Claude, but I don't know that I'm going to use it that much because chat knows me so well." And that was a value add for her. The fact that the
Hmm.
memory was
It's built the
stored
memories, and yeah, yeah, exactly.
and that it gives her better answers more quickly. We just started thinking about the portability of memory, the portability of your identity. And I was really thinking about it from a product standpoint. Like I would love a product that would allow me to decide how much of me and which parts of me to port into that
Hmm.
AI at that moment. And I don't want the frontier model company making that decision. I want me making a decision. But that product didn't exist. And then one night my wife and I were hanging out with Daniel Meisler, and we were just like talking about this for hours. And we pulled down like my Claude MD file, and we did an analysis of. We actually asked Claude. This was over a year ago. I haven't redone this, but I asked Claude, tell me if I was an employee leaving a company, what percentage of this would the company get upset if I took, and what part of it should I be upset if I left it behind for the company? And did the whole analysis. We had a good conversation about it, and I've just been ruminating on that over time and thinking about the implications. We started this conversation talking about when I was a federal prosecutor. I remember some of the cases I did involved companies coming to me and saying, Joe, ex employee so and so left and went to our competitor. You need to bring a theft of trade secrets case against them. And as a prosecutor, we always had to look at these situations and figure out, do we wade into it? There was not a lot
Yeah.
of clarity on these things. A great example is the lawsuit that Apple filed against OpenAI alleging theft of trade secrets. There's a criminal law that says you're not allowed to steal trade secrets. And so Apple, in theory, could have gone and maybe did go to the government and say, you should look at OpenAI for theft of trade secrets. In general, as a matter of public policy, we don't want companies stealing each other's trade secrets. So,
Understandable.
so that's why there's a criminal law in the books. But oftentimes in these situations, it may be better left to the civil proceedings when you're talking about these large, very valuable corporations that have lots of
Hmm.
lawyers. And so often when I was in the prosecutor's office, we'd say, let's let them duke it out in civil court, and we'll get involved in situations where there's an imbalance of power or there's an egregious violation.
Hmm.
And
Makes sense.
and so I've been thinking through that type of situation because once I became a head of security, I had to deal with employees coming and going, and we deploy things like DLP products, and we start flagging and dealing with our engineers leaving, and it was in that context that I would talk to engineers, and they'd be like, "Yeah, of course I brought my little snippets. Those are my I brought that to that company, and
Yep,
I'm going to
yep.
bring it out.
The incidental things that people bring and
It's my
back
toolbox.
and forth.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's my little shortcuts. Nobody else likes those shortcuts. They're just for me." And I could see the arguments both ways, and I think we kind of settled into not a like there was never a really clear line drawn in the example of engineers bringing those little snippets between companies, but it just kind of like evolved into what it is. And I think right now that little issue that engineers had has blown up into a much bigger issue because we're being asked to use our brain to create a bunch of memory and skills and things like that inside our work AI. And so the question then is, when we leave that company, how are we going to deal with those situations? And I haven't seen anybody talk about it with a lot of depth. So I figured I'd put up an article and see what kind of reactions I could get.
That's very interesting. So I think probably the reason you haven't heard about it is just most people haven't. It hasn't really occurred to them what's that like. Well, there's probably two things. One, probably it's just getting started that people are actually realizing that's a lot of what the work they're being paid for. I'm guessing they haven't thought through the repercussions of what this means longer term. And three, it's such a novel way of having to think about things, because now instead of it's a tool you left behind, you wrote a script that does this, or you wrote the policy that does that. It's a download of how my brain works, how I think about problems, how I approach stuff. And maybe that's okay. That's what we're giving away and or selling, I guess, in the context of an employment engagement. But I don't know that's been a mindful choice that anyone's making. It's just sort of the default because no one's really thought about it. So I mean, I think it's great to raise that. When you think about it, though, is there any way to split that? Because it's all semantically mixed. You have, I mean, to the point you're making, either people are leaving with some company data as part of that because the skills are going to be entwined with whatever's going on at the company. On the other hand, these are kind of your thoughts and all of that. So, I mean, do you see any way that's there's an honest way to split it, or does it end up being like we just have to blow both of these up?
Well, I honestly believe we're gonna get to a place where we have a decent outcome, because enough people are gonna be invested in pushing us in that direction. But to me, this is just like one example of many places where AI is causing us to rethink what the norms and expectations are because of what technology can do. And what we see over and over again in the short term is we have a lot of disagreement. It's very messy. And then over time, we evolve into a better place. And so my hope in the short term is that I just raise some awareness of this issue, and people will be a little bit more intentional in the way they think about it. Like
that's an important part.
Like when I started a new job, I can be intentional about, in the same way that I use a different browser login, like how many people have multiple browsers running on their work machine, for example, where they're logged in their work identity on one, and then they're logged in their personal identity in another. Even just for even saving your tabs and things like that, or your privacy and your history, you kind of want to have some separation. So a lot of us who are privacy conscious have probably thought about those things in the past. I think we'll be at a minimum, we'll be more intentional now. But I don't think that's the ideal outcome either. If I use one AI for my personal life and another for my work life, do I have to have two separate machines? Some of us carry multiple phones or multiple computers because we work in cybersecurity and have those requirements.
Have a lot of pockets that need to be filled.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know. I just think we're in the messy period right now where we need to start thinking more about these things. And
do you think it's that? I mean, how do you think about it when it comes to just more broadly, if you're your average person in security, or it really could be anywhere in most of these white collar jobs, where are the people automating themselves out of a future job, or is that inevitable? I guess it can be both, that it's inevitable and it's coming. And so you should be learning a new skill as you're doing this, because the new skills that are going to be valuable are not what's in your head, because all the good people are putting the stuff in their heads into, whether it's skills or the models being trained themselves or whatever. And the value is now something entirely different than what it has been historically.
I think in my career, I've always had the view that I wanted to figure out how to replace myself every day. In terms, once I became a leader of teams, I always felt that anything I did repeatedly was not a good use of my time. And so I was out.
Yep.
I've just developed the discipline of every day kind of looking at, what did I just do? Could I automate that? Could I push it down to someone else on the team? And I think that has allowed me to grow a lot in my career and push me out of my comfort zone. I'm more optimistic than a lot of people when it comes to this concept of like, are you going to automate yourself out of a job. Like I know that, you know, I know it's a myth that we only use 5% of our brains. Like I tried to convince my 13-year-old stepson that we only use 5% of our brains, and he showed me through AI
It's
that
like,
that's not true.
not
Uh,
true. Yeah.
uh, but the reality is, I do believe that we all have a lot more potential to grow when we get out of those repetitive tasks. And so finding ways to automate things, in my mind, always has helped me to move on to more strategic things. I never feel like I'm at work and I run out of things to do. I'm actually
Seems to not be a thing that hits most of us.
right. So I'm actually, what if I can get out of those repetitive tasks and automate them, I'm always happy to move on to something more strategic.
So it sounds like then, I mean, it's almost like a mindset shift of you're not worrying about being automated out of a job, but automating yourself into a better job where, you're getting more done, you're getting all these things done. You can focus on, like you said, more strategic things and the tactical things that would have bogged you down. You've automated those bits out, which enables you to use the parts of your brain that and the parts of your skills that are more valuable. What are those things? Like, what do you see as the skills, particularly in security, that end up being kind of the things that you can't transfer to, a skill or a model or whatever, that ends up being really valuable to individuals? Like, where do you see that?
Yeah, it's funny. So I run a security consulting business where I work with a few different companies. And one of the companies that I've been working with for a couple of years, a public company. And we were looking at what one of the sub teams on their security team had lost a bunch of people from the team and was really struggling to get back going. And it was actually the team that does enterprise security or IT security, the sub team that does that. And when we were in that, we were looking at this team and what's going well and not going well right now. And we decided to go in and look at the tickets. Basically, what are they being asked to do? And we realized that trying to hire someone who is a traditional IT security person who sits in front of a console all day long, and I configured Okta, I configured the DLP, I configured
Clicked all
this
the buttons.
or that. I clicked all the buttons. Like we don't. That's not what we were looking for. We're looking for, and I used the dated term. I said we're looking for MacGyvers. A lot of what would, and MacGyver was a TV show from when
And
I was
going to say everybody under like 38 is like wondering what we're talking about now.
But
great.
The cool thing about MacGyver was every show started with this is a guy who got thrown into like some crazy situation and it's almost like an escape room. You had to look and find like what are the things in my environment I can duct tape together to get us through this situation. And the reality of cybersecurity is that we do a lot of that. And I get to see this more, when I was inside eBay and PayPal for 7 years, and then inside Facebook for 7 years, and inside Cloudflare for 5 years. Like you're living in one stack, and you start to think of it as like the stack. But when you're a consultant, you realize no two organizations have close to the same stack. Like it's every organization.
Especially when you get into the details.
When you get into the details, even if you're using the same vendors, the way it's all put together is different. Our environments are so complex, and most of the different products that we're slapping together to make our IT environment for our organizations were not built with each one is great by itself, but then our environment is a stack of a whole bunch of them, and there are huge cracks between them. And it's often the job of security to figure out, how do I reduce the risks that's caused by those cracks? And so
it's like the adaptability ends up being really important at that point.
Yeah, so I think the security engineer mindset is a MacGyver mindset a lot of the time. Is like, I haven't looked at this exact situation before. There's no playbook for it. I mean, the playbook is try this, then try that, and try that. It's not.
Yep.
It's not like it's easy to diagnose. You need a new starter for your car. It's like much more complicated than that. And so we're used to, and we should be always thinking when we run into those situations, is this problem going to show up again? Can I automate detecting it? Can I automate it? Can I build a systemic response to eliminate this threat? So we're always thinking about, how do we resolve a risk in a way that is automated for the long term so that we never have to look at it again? So I actually think in security, there's something fundamental about that's constantly pushing us to be doing what AI is now pushing us to do.
Yep. Just thinking in like iterative loops, and like you're going to hit things. Like you fix one thing, you automate it. You know that there's the next thing that you're going to hit. I mean, you're just kind of working your way up the stack. Yeah, I mean, I think that's great, and that probably is even some of the skills that people are codifying and leaving behind. But it's such a skill that, I mean, at least the models we have now and the models that will be out the next few years, I mean, that's not something that they're going to be able to replicate. Is kind of the attention in the broader context, because they can't hold all of your world of knowledge that you have. So, I mean, at least for the next few years, it seems like we're certainly at least more protected in that sense for those that adapt. Talking about some of the zero retention, or data being retained or not. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of companies, the first thing they ask is, are you training on our data? Do you retain data? Wondering about all of that. And I noticed when Fable came out, and, the whole Mythos thing, that they basically, even if you have zero data retention, data is now potentially being retained for, I think it was like a couple of years or something, potentially. How should companies be thinking about this? Because the data sitting out there, and obviously in your experience as a prosecutor, you have ideas about data that can be retained and what the implications of that are. How should companies think about this? And, for you, do you recommend people are using, like, stay off of these latest models because your data is sitting there and it's out of your control, or how do you kind of frame that trade-off?
Yeah, I think we have to think about it from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're the model provider or anyone who's collecting someone else's data, our expectation is that you're transparent, right? Like that, like that's the lesson of the last 20 years. We can't stop companies from collecting data about us, but GDPR and the country level laws in Europe before that forced all of us who worked in kind of international platforms to think about these issues for a long time. Like one of the heaviest lifts I ever, I think, had to do in my work was helping Facebook become GDPR compliant back 15
Can't
years
imagine
ago.
how much work that would be.
It was insane because we had to figure out, like, what is every single type of database that we have inside this company, what actually is stored about each individual user, how do we surface it and give each person the right to be able to tell us to delete it, and then we would have
what's
to
theirs, what's their friends, or, I mean, there's
and how you draw the line,
ownership.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of interesting nuances there, like the concept of derivative data. What I realized is that the most important thing is that we be really transparent with people about what we're collecting of theirs, and we give them the right to be able to say delete it. And that's the standard now, I think, not just in the EU, but here as well, because a lot of companies, when faced with GDPR, decided it's easier to build, it became a floor globally for these companies because it was easier to build it to a single standard than to try and differentiate.
Yeah. Most other countries seem to, like, they've mirrored more or less what's going on with GDPR when it comes to data privacy.
Right. And so as consumers, a lot of us in the United States benefited from those pushes in other countries, because regulation has a way of raising the floor across the board. But so from the model provider side, we need more transparency of what they're collecting and how. And I want to make a specific point about this. I think that one of the arguments for not sharing data with the model companies is, they're going to learn about our business and then they're going to come and copy it and put us out of business. Even if they're not training on your data, they still get a lot of information about your business. And so I think sometimes businesses miss this nuance, which is, if you are using a model provider, they can tell the volume of requests you're making. They can see your company is making 10 times more requests. You have 3 people there and it's spiking. They can tell there's a lot going on at this company, as opposed to, so they can tell lots of different ways which categories of business on their platform are taking off. And if they want to copy those businesses, it's not that hard for them to do. And if the model was good enough for us to use the model, it's going to be good enough for them to compete with us, even if they don't train on data. So on the provider side, they need to be transparent about what they're collecting, what the and then we on the outside, with that transparency, can make our own independent risk decisions.
Yep, no, I think that's great, and I think that's where maybe Grok fell aside this week. We find out they were gathering data regardless. I mean, and it is one thing that I think is interesting because everyone's always worried about model training, but I think that maybe to your point matters less because the models are already trained on an awful lot of data. And what they need to copy anyone's given business isn't training new model or training models on more of your data. It's understanding the workflows and maybe tied to the derivative data you raised earlier. I mean, if you can watch every query people are running, you can start seeing where the problems they're hitting are and understanding how if you can connect those, you can put together a pretty good idea of the interesting processes that make a business run. But I don't see a whole lot of people asking about any of these things. It's much more about just training on the data, which to me has never really been a huge threat because I mean you can't just pop stuff back out of a model because you ran a document into it as part of the training set. So
Right.
yeah,
No,
I don't have a good answer. It's a very interesting one though.
that was a hypothetical fear of 2024 that was
Yep.
disproved, I think. Yeah, I don't think that the frontier model companies, when they have these mistakes like the Grok one you talked about, or the Anthropic with their logging of information and not being transparent about it when when Fable came out and things like that, I don't think that the engineers inside those companies are intentionally trying to deceive us and hoard a bunch of our data. I think it's much more that they're moving quickly as things are evolving, and they're like, well, we need to do some logging. We need to
I mean,
figure
we could all
out.
imagine that happening, that discussion happening, and someone be like, "What? I just needed to know where they're coming from."
Right. And in order to do my job in terms of safety,
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting pressured and make sure that the model doesn't go to these places. So I'm going to do some logging. It's just like that's the way security teams think. And they forgot to tell legal, or legal didn't understand the technical
It just
terminology,
never crossed their mind that they should have probably.
or they queued it up to put it in the privacy policy change that's coming in 3 months, or who knows what's going on the inside. I having been inside a lot of these companies over the years and still working with a bunch of them, I think that we, on the one hand, should give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that they're well intentioned, but at the same time, we should be pushing them to be a lot more intentionally transparent about what they're doing.
Yeah, well, if nobody pushes back, then I mean, then there isn't really a bar to hit. Whereas if they know, hey, we're going to get a lot of blowback for this, I mean, people are much more intentional than about being transparent. But then, yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's been in the trenches knows how those things go, where somebody's doing something and just there's a lot of stuff going on, and very easy for something like that to drop. Especially, I think in the Anthropic case, where it was just they're trying to figure out where people are coming from. You can also imagine an engineer just not realizing that would even cause anyone to get upset because they don't think that way and it never crossed their mind, type of thing. Yeah, and so one of the things I wanted to touch on, I mean, I'm sure you saw Alex Demo's letter a few weeks ago on Fable and having the frontier models pushed back on. He was on a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about it before it actually had happened, but I'm curious, kind of your thoughts on that, because we had, I think just yesterday, maybe it was today, Hugging Face kind of announced that they were breached, and it was a full, the thing that we've all been talking about, the fear, a full agentic system that hit them, and they got blocked. They just said they were using commercial frontier models in incident response and trying to kind of piece together the timeline. And it was like, hey, I can't do this. This seems like you're doing some, potentially security things, and I'm not going to help you. Curious what your thoughts are, or maybe if they've changed before or after, or just the entire situation, where you sit on that.
I have two main thoughts on this that one I wrote an article about that I published, and one I wrote an article about that I haven't yet published, because I've been thinking about these things a lot. First, I think that we as a security community need to step back and be more holistic in the way we think about the models and the risk associated with the models. Like, when we see like the U.S. government looking heavy-handed, we shouldn't think about it in a political way. We should think about it in a big picture way. The risks of the best models getting in the hands of the bad guys, there's a much bigger risk than the cybersecurity risk. When we start talking about nuclear proliferation and chemical weapons,
biological,
and things like that, there are a lot of other threats. And so when we see the actions of the U.S. government and the like, we should remember that they're thinking about not just us and our cybersecurity risk stuff. And we should be thinking about what are all the mitigating controls we should be putting in place around models. And the thing I worry about most is that we're very focused on one little narrow place, which is how do we regulate the pace of release by US proprietary frontier model companies? And should we be focused on controls that they are suggesting? Like I've worked inside big tech companies and I've worked with a lot of big tech companies since being inside them. And when you're on the inside, you spend a lot of money on lobbyists and you frame all of the regulatory conversations in ways that are in your best interest. And so most of the conversation that we're having is being driven by the frontier model companies and the way they want us to think about constraining AI. And they would like all of the constraints to be in their hands, because they're the quote unquote experts. But but we should actually be stepping back, and I think the U.S. government should be, and I see some signs that they're trying to do this, and thinking through, like if we have risks to deal with around AI models, we can constrain it in lots of different places. At the time that the model is being trained, there are things that we could do, but there are things that we could done at the hardware layer. There are things that can be done at the time they're being run, so on down the line. There's just like a dozen places where you could have interventions. And we should be having a conversation about all of those. And we should be having the conversation not just in the context of Fable. It should be in the context of all of the different AI models that are being generated out there. This morning's news is, the freak out of the day is that the latest Chinese open source model is almost at the level of Fable. Some say it's even better than Fable. So that's the noise of the day today. And, and the Chinese government, came out with some statements in the last day saying like we should all be embracing open source models. The reality is, I think we're going to have, if we zoom into the future, there are going to be a lot more different models that are vertical. Like in my working with startup hat, I see a lot of like vertical tailored models,
specialized models for different areas and different pieces. Yeah, makes sense.
And where there's a lot of post training done on an open source model or an older closed source model. It doesn't matter. If you have the harnesses right and you have the right post training, you can do lots of different things. So we shouldn't be thinking about how we regulate the risk or manage the risk just in this narrow context of the top frontier models, top models.
It seems like, I do feel sometimes I'm saying it, I'm like, oh, am I making the same argument of like the only thing, that'll stop a bad guy with a gun is, more guns for everybody, which never quite feels right. So I can't tell if it's that, the part you raise about, we shouldn't be looking at politically seems difficult though, since it's so intertwined with global politics, with China in particular. And everybody knows that whoever quote unquote wins the AI race ends up with huge economic advantages, throughout the world. And it does seem, go ahead.
I just think it's naive to believe that there's going to be a winner and a loser here.
It's not a zero sum.
The reality is, sure, we can if our priority is to keep 6 months ahead of another country on models, we possibly can do that, but I'm not 100% certain. And I'm also not sure that's the ultimate game that we want to play, because the reality is every country on the planet has had to deal with the reality of 2026. I mean, if I was over in London when a bunch of the US companies were given access to Mythos and they weren't, and they're turning to the government and being like, this is unacceptable. How can our large financial services institutions not be given the ability to defend ourselves while the US is giving their financial institutions the ability to defend themselves? So every country on the planet has an imperative to get their access to AI to the same level as ours in the United States. Ultimately, like I feel like we can learn the lessons from things like nuclear proliferation,
Yep,
where
definitely.
the United States realized we can't keep nuclear weapons out of the hands of Russia and China. I mean, I guess in the case of Russia, we gave them the technology, or someone we didn't want to give them the technology gave them the technology. Theft of trade secrets, like we were talking about. There's there's some of that is happening here, and like, do we honestly believe that we're gonna completely suppress China from developing world-class models and catching up with us in the next 5 years? I I don't know. I'm not in the weeds of it that far, but I believe that the best outcome is going to be where some of the great powers, so to speak, are working in collaboration to set some
Hmm.
shared limitations and on each other. And so I think we need to start negotiating more
I think that's the
internationally.
only thing that works more. I mean, any of the rest of this is just kind of dusting on the wrong problem, right? Because the problem is the competition and everyone, exactly like you said, thinking this is a zero-sum game. Either we win and you lose, or the other way around, as opposed to how do we make this where humanity as a whole wins? And it doesn't seem like that's, especially with some of the rhetoric coming out, it doesn't seem like that's sort of how we're more generally looking at that problem, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think we all fall into this, living and working in Silicon Valley for the last 25 years. I've seen, or more, I've seen that we sometimes, as like our technologists communities, develop a little bit of a hubris of like, we're, because we built the technology, we're the smartest about how to regulate it.
Yep.
Even though I've never spent any of my career regulating, I can have strong opinions about regulation, like, but we're not really interested in everybody else's strong opinions about the technology because we're the technologists and they're not. But like, and so
Usually glosses over a lot of messy details too.
yeah, like I remember the first, I went to China in 2010, and I was there to speak at a conference, and China was going through this was the era when we were all kind of like debating like censorship in China versus the
Mm-hmm.
United States approach to the internet and things like that. And I had I had this amazing experience. I was speaking to a PhD class there, and I stood up in front of the class. The professor introduced me, and he said, Joe said he's happy to answer any question. The student raised his hand and he said, "Why is there so much porn on Facebook?" And I was like, I didn't even think of Facebook as having porn on it in
Yeah, you're like,
2010.
I don't know, I've never noticed.
And and I'm the CSO of Facebook standing there. I'm like, the coolest thing happened. The professor stepped. He said, "Why is there so much porn on Facebook?" And I said, "Well, I don't think there's that much porn." And he said, but we block Facebook in China because of all the porn. Why do you think Facebook is blocked in China?" And
And you're like, oh, uh,
uh, and the professor stepped in front of me and he said, "Don't ask Joe why Facebook is blocked in China. Ask yourself."
ah, so
And I
good.
and I was like, "Oh, thank you for the save." But then it led to an amazing conversation, and it made me realize in that moment that the way I was thinking about how people in China thought about regulation was that like they were just had no voice at all at any level. And
Mm-hmm.
was a PhD group of technologists who were very smart, a lot of whom had spent time in the United States, and we were able in Tianjin to have a really good conversation about this. And again, it made me feel like sitting in Silicon Valley, I was a little bit uninformed about the world, and that like I don't have I haven't spent time thinking about politics and how governments should work together or not on these things. And I
Mm-hmm.
wish our governments could be, have more mature conversations like we have had on, say, like nuclear proliferation, or set some
Yep, yep.
standards. And then
Well, and it's definitely. Oh, go ahead.
I think AI is going to force some international collaboration.
Yeah, hopefully not due to some sort of terrible disaster, but it does seem like that. I mean, that is the only path forward, because at the difference between nuclear proliferation and this is someone gets a model, it can be instantly copied and sent, 1,000 times over. Whereas it's much easier to control who gets centrifuges and all of the different components you need. So, I mean, it is something that seems very, very important for all of us to work together on, and I think it is important also, like you said, to think more broadly than just security. You got all the other reasons, not only biological and the others that are obvious, but like just the economic impact this is going to have more broadly. and what the implications for society are.
Yeah. And so I mentioned that I had two thoughts. So the first was kind of that big picture thought. The second
Hmm.
was, as a security community, I kind of feel like we should be biasing towards open source models. Like
Hmm.
if you remove the all the open source models are coming from China narrative and just talk about open
Hmm.
source more generally in the context of software and technology and AI, open source gives us as security people more flexibility in our approaches. It Most of us don't work at large frontier model companies, and so open source will save our companies a lot of money. Open
Yep.
source
Yep.
also allows us to tailor models more specifically for our environments, through the different types of pre and post training that we can do, and even, building more specific industry focused vertical models. And so I feel like we shouldn't just focus on pushing to get like access to Fable. We should be focusing on like how do we more broadly get access to the best models for our individual teams, for ourselves,
Hmm.
for our companies, and things like that. And so that's the second thing I've been thinking about is how do we find how do we as a security community find a voice to be pushing some of these things that are on our best interest, not just someone else's best interest. Yeah, just that I think as a security community, we should spend a little more time thinking about where do we want AI to go? And I think if we do, we'll come to the conclusion
Hmm.
that open source models and us having lots of good access to high quality open source models is in our best interest.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting because maybe leading back to the zero data retention and all of that. I mean, if you think of like Hugging Face, they ended up, I think, pulling Kimmy or Quinn or something and running it locally. It may be tied to also some of the things about handling disclosure. If you're doing your incident response, is it important now for people to even think, well, we should be using open source models because we're in control of that data instead of shipping off stuff to Claude or to over to OpenAI. I mean, it certainly is something that with all of these developments we've been talking about, that if people aren't considering and kind of weighing the benefits and costs back and forth, and at least having a mindful plan, that they're kind of doing a disservice to their own programs. Like how do you think about that when maybe one side would be the disclosure bit, well, of having the data available for it's now held in retention somewhere else that's sort of out of your control, but also when it comes to having plans for you can't rely on commercial models right now, for doing say incident response things like that.
Yeah, I think that there are too many frustrations with the approach we have right now, and that's what's going to lead to the change that I'm optimistic about. I don't want to have a model stop working in the middle of an incident response.
Yeah,
It's
that's
it's no different than that dialogue between Anthropic and the Department of War. Like, I 100% understand why, the U.S. government does not want to be in a situation where a model stops working while a
yeah. I mean,
firefighter is making a decision. And
or you can see both sides certainly.
yeah, yeah, if you don't want your product to be used in that environment, don't sell the product to that customer. Uh,
Yep.
and also be transparent about your limitations. I think it was I think at the end of the day, if we put aside the kind of the politics of it, that debate and dialogue between Anthropic and the Department of War was really good to have.
It had
And
to happen at some point.
yeah, and it happened because Anthropic became transparent about what they felt the limitations should be, and the Department of War saw that and then reached out and was like, "Hey, wait a minute, we have a contract, but it feels like you might decide to turn it off. Let's make sure you don't." And they're like, "We will." And so they had to like get to that place. So I think props to both sides for initiating that dialogue and getting us all thinking about it a little bit more. In these situations, it's really important for us to be able to like put on the hat of both sides to really
Hmm.
understand where each side's coming from and see that both sides are being reasonable. There aren't any easy answers, and we're not always going to get to the kumbaya place where everybody plays well together.
Probably not in that case. When it comes to all the access to these models, because they got hit with a full agentic attack, which is what we've been talking about. And then, with all the stuff with Mythos and the limited access that OpenAI has been giving to companies to harden their systems. I mean, what do you feel like companies should be doing now? Because like you mentioned the UK financial services. I mean, should everybody, even if they don't have access to these latest models, I mean, is it irresponsible at this point not to be running constant pen tests and trying to find, all the vulnerabilities and patch stuff as fast as you can and, build adaptive defenses? Where do you see the main things that people should be jumping on given how fast this is moving?
I think one of the lessons I've learned from working with the companies that I spend time with is that the harnesses are just as important as the models. Mm-hmm. There's no reason any security team can't be investing in figuring out and build by combination, whatever, the right harness for your environment. Like we were talking about earlier, every company has a different environment internally. Yeah. You're going to optimize whatever model you get by building the harness that works best for your environment. So regardless of what model you have access to today, you should be investing in building out those harnesses so that you can plug in different models as you get access to them. Yeah. I think that's priority number one. And so nobody should be sitting on their hands waiting to get somebody's going to someday give you the best model. You got to get to work, build your harnesses. And there are lots of stories of people saying, and I see this all the time, oh, I found this vulnerability with Fable or Mythos. With the right harness, I would have been able to find it with a much lesser model.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. I mean, there's like the OpenAI ChatGPT 5.6 with like the Shannon pen test harness. I mean, I was just amazed watching that thing work. It was great.
Yeah. So the I don't have access to the latest model is not an excuse. On the front end, build the right harnesses. On the back end, I think we're a little bit challenged in the way we think about vulnerability management traditionally is constraining us. I've seen, so I'm on the board of a company called Stackhawk, which is an AppSec company, and they recently launched a fundamentally new product, which is an automated remediation tool. So basically find, fix, and test during build. Rolling that out to customers, it's been really interesting I've learned a lot from watching. Some companies are just like, great, let's just auto remediate all the vulns and then we'll retest and then we give a green light to the code going live in production. Whereas some teams are like, we have a vulnerability management process. We need to review and rank each vuln. And then we need to, we have to follow the process. And I'm like, no, the code generation is automated with AI. We should be doing we should be automating the vuln remediation at the same time and not treating it as like a process where there needs to be a human in the loop all the time. I think
that's the downloading the stuff that's in your head into, okay, well, how would you have validated that anyway? Let's get that as to its own separate harness.
Yeah. So like the customers of Stackhawk who have been like totally like, wait a minute, you can just auto remediate all those vulns and they're technical and they get comfortable with it. Like they're doing vuln remediation at machine speed in the same way that the engineering team is doing code generation at machine speed. And so like our security teams shouldn't be doing the same job in 2026 that they were doing in 2024 when it comes to code review. If they are, that's just a sure sign something's wrong. Yeah, exactly. With my VC hat on, because I work part-time at Costanoa as a venture partner, and we a few months ago decided to go deep on AppSec. And one of the things I realized is that AppSec is fundamentally changing. Obviously, software engineering and code development changed fundamentally in the last year. And so AppSec needs to change to catch up. Well, on the software engineering side, engineering seems to have settled into, they figured out, okay, we're a Cursor company, we're a Claude Code company, or we're going to do our own thing where we use some of those. And like the engineering side is getting sorted, the AppSec side is still chaos. And we need to really focus on how do we tighten up automating code quality faster. Not just using the same old vuln management remediation approaches from the past, because we're not going to be able to keep up.
I think to the exact same thing we were talking about before, again, like you should be automating yourself into a different job, because the things that you would have done before, like how do you threat model, how would you look at code and look for vulnerabilities, Corridor that Alex is working on, that stuff a model is going to do better than a person who can have a bad day or didn't get enough sleep or whatever. And then that frees you up to start looking more broadly at, like, how do we do this at scale? How do we do this in mass? How do we help the teams move faster while staying more secure? And it certainly makes for a very different discussion as to what that role even is, if you look at it out in the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's I often tell people that the hardest part of my job when I was the CSO at Facebook, Uber, and Cloudflare was getting my team to do the repetitive grunt work. One of the things you realize when you're the head of a security organization is that security engineers love to work on the cool projects, love to,
engineers
love to focus on and chase the latest things, but that 90% of what a security organization does has historically been a lot of repetitive tasks, a lot of looking for needles in a haystack. Part of the reason I'm optimistic right now is because AI is really good at the part of the job that I spent all my time trying to drag my team into doing. It was just like, stop working on the cool new stuff and go, do the vuln remediation. Stop working on the cool new stuff and go review our cloud configuration one more time.
And now it can flip.
Yeah.
I was like, why are you doing this boring stuff? Go automate that.
Yeah. So I'm excited the more we get to that place. I think that the challenges in 2026 is that the AI automation in security is happening on one-off levels on our teams.
No, that is absolutely it. It's like, how do you share the knowledge?
We're all the best events that I go to are when we get a group of practitioners together and we share best practices about how we're using AI inside our companies. And it's just like, oh, I didn't even think of it. You could do that. A lot
That's
of this
the most
stuff,
fun part.
3 years from now, all of this like sloppy iterating that we're doing is going to be productized. The best practices are going to be copied and taken out, and people are going to start companies, and then we'll be able to buy the products. It's no different than way back when I was at Facebook. We built OS Query and open sourced it, and we did that because we needed to solve a problem. We didn't have good, in 2010,
across the entire fleet.
2010 Facebook, the whole company was using MacBooks, but there was no good EDR type solution or anything to give us visibility. So we built OS Query to get visibility on our Macs. We don't need OS Query in 2026 to get visibility on Macs, but OS Query is here to stay and, has provide a lot of value in servers and other contexts. We don't want to have every company building in their own versions of OS Query for dealing with security in 2027. We want to see some product companies step in and take our best practices because I'll tell you, building an open source product and maintaining it is a lot of work.
Yeah, especially now, I think when they're getting all the reports from people on the internet who are pointing Claude at it and submitting bugs or patches or whatever, and all of that stuff basically has to change. This has been a great conversation. I really want to grateful you came on, and Zoo, just the insights you have, particularly on the broad global scale, are just you've been exposed to so many things that others haven't. So thank you so much for coming on and making time.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the TPRM podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe and share it with a colleague. You can find more insights and resources over at tprmpodcast.com. And until next time, remember, trust nothing, verify most things, and keep building. That's it for this episode of the TPRM podcast. I'm Nate Lee. Thanks for joining me and my guest today. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, and share the episode with your peers and colleagues. For more resources and insights on building business-aligned security programs and managing vendor security, visit tprmpodcast.com and connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.